Welcome to the Growth Whisperers Podcast, where everything we talk about is about building enduring great companies, because Brad and I just kind of like it. We kind of think it's a great thing to do, to build a business for generations or decades, however you want to look at it. I'm Kevin Lawrence, and as always, here for more than 100 episodes in a row, actually 113 as of today, with my co-host Brad Giles down under in Perth, Australia. Brad, how are you today?
Lovely, thank you. Doing very well. How are you?
Good, as always. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, and by the way, before we get into the show today, if you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. And if you kind of like what you hear, happy for you to give us a rating as well. So, Brad, what are we digging into today? What is the topic of the day?
Today, we're talking about think time. That is taking the time purposefully to think, to step out of the day-to-day, of the busyness, and to be able to think. And we call it think time, the only way to really be strategic.
Like that, think time, take the time to think. It's very simple and often for a lot of people, hard to do. And, we've seen a big difference in the CEOs that we work with. I actually had a really interesting conversation with one of the CEOs that I work with about this, and he came back with a brilliant answer, which we'll talk about in a bit. All right, so let's get into it. And what's your word of the day, Brad? What's your word?
It's know your customers. It's a phrase, not a word. But a few weeks ago, we had an election in Australia. The government was voted out, and without getting into it, a lot of people were really shocked. And the analogy for me was, do you know your customers? Because you shouldn't be shocked when things happen. Like that government that was voted out, they shouldn't be shocked at the reaction of the electorate. And there's been endless articles written about why and how did it happen and so forth. But you should, as a leader, you should never be in that situation. Know your customers. What about yours, Kev?
Awesome. Anticipation. And it's in a similar perspective. I actually just quickly on a break here got a call from my son telling us about a new piece of legislation that our government is trying to jam through. And you can tell that they have been waiting to jam this piece of legislation through until something bad happened in the world that would be a catalyst and got a lot of public support. I mean, kudos to the government. They got this stuff all ready to rock, and they're just waiting for the opportune time. They're anticipating just the right moment to drop the mic, change the laws, and change the country forever. Better or worse, depending on your opinion. So know your customers and anticipate their behaviors so you can influence them the way you want to. All right, so let's jump into today. Think time. I mean, this is a topic that we're very passionate on. I'll share a story. So this CEO, who's an awesome CEO in a country in the Southern Hemisphere, I will say. And we were having a conversation, and I called it about being a strategic CEO. I think there's many different types. There's tactical CEOs, there's operational CEOs, and then there's real strategic CEOs. And I call strategic CEOs big C CEOs and tactical ones little c CEOs. And it's not, well, it depends on your stage of business and where you're at, but truly to be a CEO of a business that's going to sustain and endure, you need a fair amount of big C on the big C CEO, and that's a lot of contemplation. And so, or being a real strategic CEO, looking out at the future of where you're going and you're going to be versus where you are in the fires of the day. And so the CEO, we came up with the questions, how do I be a better strategic CEO? So he talked to lots of different people. And what he came back to, and I've got it written on my wall because it was so complicated. Let me grab it. Let me grab it. It's not just CEOs, it's leaders too. And here it is in Kevin's beautiful writing. Is it reversed? It says, no. Think time equals strategic leader. So think time is the number one variable that he came back with from his research. And from what we've seen in our work with CEOs is the real driver of being a true strategic big C or strategic CEO. So that's, it's obviously critical, and it's just damn hard. Like, it's really hard because of all the daily fires, the daily drama, the 75-cent problems all come up, and they keep you real busy and keep you from your high value strategic think time.
I love Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that, he has the time management matrix. And most people, especially in business, get drawn towards the things that are important and urgent. Yeah. And the job to be done for a CEO is to traverse that and spend most of your time in the area which is things that are important but not urgent. And part of that is this think time that we're talking about.
So maybe that's the answer. Would you just say to yourself, important, not urgent, like 10 times a day, and maybe you'll magically do it. But if
that's Kevin's advice, not mine.
Well, if that doesn't work, we got a whole bunch of other good things. And like Brad and I normally do, what do we got here? We got 6 real good things that you can do to be a more strategic CEO or leader, and really mastering of your think time in particular. And the main thing is that if you don't do enough of the think time, you get sucked into the day-to-day, and it's damn interesting. There's drama, there's problems, there's upset customers, underperforming employees, all that kind of stuff. And you just get sucked in. If you're not careful, I mean, I look at a strategic CEO as like eyes up looking at the future. And if you're not capable, the environment will pull you back down to the ground and before you're looking at your toes, like what's happening in the next 30 seconds. Yeah. And obviously you can't do your best work there. That's not your job, most of the time.
I remember when I had a larger business, I'd walk into the office back from a meeting, and there'd be like 17 people would look up back over their workstation and see that I'm back. And they'd be like, oh, he's back. I can grab him, and I don't know, whatever the problem was. I managed to work that out. But yeah, you can get dragged into the minutia all the time.
Yeah. And even in our firm, and again, we're a small boutique firm, but in our firm, I don't have a lot of that because most of the team is very strong and independent. I mean, we have an obsession with only hiring A players in our firm. But my challenge is I am also very busy. I'm going here, I'm going there, and I've got lots of interests outside of work, and teenage kids, and I've got so many things going on that just making the time to think is harder in my case, even though it's not necessarily my team pulling me so much. It's me. Yeah. I'm usually the biggest culprit. But no matter what, the whole idea here is think time is very, very rich, valuable time, and a critical part of our roles.
I want to frame it this way. In terms of our bodies,
please do. Yes.
In terms of our bodies, we need to sleep every day. Okay. We need to recharge, recuperate, and recover. So thinking for the CEO, exec, and leaders, it's like conscious sleep. So it recharges your mind. It gets you to be able to think in different ways and to be able to spend the time, in that important and not urgent area. So think about it like conscious sleep.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's therapeutic, and it's really doing your job of leading the firm and thinking about where you're going. And if you want to continue to grow, it's required. So we got 6 points, and sometimes I like 7, but 6 is good for today. So the biggest thing with your think time is to really pick the topic. Like what is the question that you want to come up with, a compelling question that you're trying to get the answer to. And ideally, it's one of your highest value opportunities. It's a thing that's going to make a difference to your business, whether it's $1 million or millions or tens of millions, like a really big, opportunity that could really have a massive positive impact and scale your business. And I mean, obviously we have to deal with problems and process problems. But I would also say is that be careful of sticking to problems too long, because you're going to be staring at your shoes versus looking at the horizon. yeah, it's important to be thinking about the things that make a massive difference.
And that might just come to mind. That might be, yeah, this is the thing that's on my mind. But actually spending a moment to think, what is it that I want to use this valuable time for? It does matter. And I guess the second point is that some people won't want to do that. Some people, they will be just like, oh, I just want to clear my mind and then see what sort of flows into my mind from there. And that's okay if you want to start freestyle. But the point being, either consciously pick a topic or know that you're not consciously going to pick a topic.
Yeah, both works depending. So for example, I did a bunch of this on Saturday morning, and my preference is to sit and go freestyle and allow myself to go. And I often do a lot of this through writing, is to write. One of my processes is writing. My other's collaboration, but is writing as much as I want and flushing out all kinds of things. My dining table was covered in stuff that I had written on, because I did a bunch of it on paper this time instead of digitally. But then I always go back to my goals and pick something off my goals soon. I might have solved 3 or 4 little things, but then I go back to my goals and figure, what can I do to make a big impact on my goals? Because that's the stuff that matters most. Again, however you do it, sometimes I can do it in a few minutes or a big chunk of hours, which we'll talk about next, which is number 2. So number 1, pick the topic or decide that you're going to go freestyle. 2, set the time. And this is really the clincher here, where for most people, they don't find a way to really make the time and stick to it. They might plan for it. And Bill Gates was famous for his Think Weeks, which became 2 weeks, where he'd go away for a week every year and do this. And I know a number of people that use that strategy. Some people do it quarterly, some monthly, everyone's got rhythms. But it's interesting, just like artists, it actually is a discipline. There's a great book. I'll remember the name of it. It might be How Artists Work, I think is the book. And it's fascinating. You think of these artists as these creative, free-flowing thing that work on inspiration. Farthest from the truth. All the artists you've heard about, writers, painters, sculptors, poets, all of them have one thing in common: freakish daily grind discipline. Must write 1,000 words today, must paint 4 hours today. Now, they might go intoxicate themselves and do all kinds of weird things to their minds, which many of them did, but it was all a incredible discipline. Nothing at all was left to a whim.
Yeah. And you've got to protect that. There is a competition every day for your calendar. There is a lot of people inside and outside the business who always want your time. And so having the ability to protect it and say, this is a no-go zone, unless the building is on fire type of thing, is what matters. I mean, for me, when I got myself an EA a while ago, I said to her, the first thing is every day in the morning, I'm going to exercise, and that's sacred time. Like we can't broach that, or put it this way, break in case of emergency. Like we've got to protect that. That's where I do my thinking.
Yeah, and some people have that around exercise and not thinking. Some people think it the point of it is you've got to find a way to do it, and that and one of the pieces there is accountability. How can you set up some accountability on that? And we'll talk more about that later. So number 2, find a time, but it needs to be scheduled. It's not likely to happen on a whim. Most things that are important don't happen on a whim. A third, know what you need. Like I referenced how I write a lot to think. That is my Puritan. Well, too, and I like to collaborate. Some people, their thinking requires learning, like they go seek out knowledge. Everyone's got different ways, but there's a way that your brain works and comes up with the solutions that you need, or the insight or the clarity. So know what you really need to be successful. So if it's contemplating, like is a big part of mine, then think about, well, what do we have to do? How do I need to set myself up? Like you touched on exercise. For me to do contemplation, I need to exercise first. I get grounded, my body calms down, my mind settles, and then I do brilliant thinking. And ideally, for me in the morning.
We know that Bill Gates used to go away for a full week, and he would take a stack of books, and he would get people within the business to write reports on certain subjects. He'd go away to the countryside in a little cabin, just by himself for the whole week, and he would read all the books and do all of that. Now, that worked for him. That may not work for you.
I couldn't do that. I would not go sit by myself in a cabin and read. I wouldn't say never, but again, everyone's got it. It doesn't really matter what it is. Figure what works.
He figured what works for him, that's good. That's good. So for some people, it's going to be learning or part of a learning event. So there's obviously getaways or retreats or learning events that you can go to. We used to go to some several years ago, and so it could form a part of that. It could form a part of something else. And then if that is your case, that you want to learn as well as the thinking, depending on the rhythm, if it's daily, weekly, quarterly, annually, pick your subjects carefully based on the trends, observations, the concerns, the opportunities that you're seeing in the business. Moving on to number 4, set the environment. Do not disturb. The worst thing you can do when you want to think is have a constant beep in the background, which is your emails coming in or your SMSs or whatever that might be. Some people like music or meditating, and I mentioned running, but it's a discipline around knowing this is where I do my best thinking.
Yeah. And it's not rocket science, but how do you set up that environment to work for you? So obviously can't get distracted. Sometimes I often will like to collaborate with people. I'll want to sit and work with somebody else on it. It's like, Brad and I, we come up with some awesome stuff collaborating on this podcast, which is multiple times better than it would be on my own. And I don't know if that's true for you, but it's sure true for me.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of the environment is the accountability, like, whether it's your EA, your family member, or colleague. Sometimes I've been in environments, this goes back to the old days in college, and your study buddy. You might have an active study group and you might just sit there and read the damn stuff. But how do you set up an environment that is a catalyst for you to do your best? It was interesting. I think I mentioned this in a previous show, but I was up at the racetrack and ran into a guy I'd given a book to, and he talked about licking your toads. And his solution was he didn't eat in the morning until he licked his toads. So how could you set up a self-discipline accountability that you don't do something, or you wait for something until you do your most important thinking? So whatever it is, set the environment, set yourself up to win. And, some people might need to organize their office first, or who knows what, or, vacuum or take out the garbage. Everyone's got their own different things. So that's setting the environment. Number 5 is just some interesting things that we've seen people do. Like, so when I interviewed CEOs for scaling up, I heard all kinds of things. Some people had a rhythm on Sunday mornings. Some people would go for a walk or a run or a bike ride. There was a couple guys that would do it brainstorming on a bike ride. That was their solution. Writing is something that I've talked about. Some people would be their EO or YPO or whatever the forum they're in. That was a real catalyst for them to activate ideas. One CEO I interviewed had one of the best ones, and I resonated with this the most. He would go and attend a 2-day conference, one of those, 14 speakers over 2 days.
Yeah.
And he did his best work because he didn't pay attention to the speakers. He tuned in when it was relevant, and he just worked on his stuff the rest of the time. And that works for me, because there's noise and energy going on around me, which enables me to focus better because of how my brain works. And that was his thing. That was his best. And this guy, built a business over a very, not an incredibly long time, sold it for $500,000, $500 million dollars. But he would just be at the conference. And all that stuff in the background did outstanding thinking. Going to meet their mentor. Another guy talked about how he would go and meet his mentor on his yacht like twice a year. And while he was traveling to go and meet his mentor, it forced him to prepare to make damn good use of the mentor's time. Another CEO I know does what calls 24 calls. It might be 14. When they have a question, they literally just call a whole bunch of different people to help them think it through. People that might have had similar experiences. Long flights. There's people I know that have booked flights, Vancouver to Toronto and back, Vancouver to Tokyo and back. Just cost-effective business class flights, pardon me. And then the funniest one is...
The problem with long flights is that I think we've all been there. And what I mean is we've all thought, oh, great, I'm going to get a lot of work done on this flight. But, we can be better than that. And that better than that means we can be more disciplined in our approach. You shouldn't need to get on a flight to produce work. You should be able to find your ability to step out of your environment and create an environment where you can do good work.
But that is an environment. I know I'm on the other side. Like, I think it's brilliant. Like, if you got high value critical work, I love 14-hour flights. They're like the best. I get so much done. And because I have a hard time sometimes getting it done in other places. So I need a deadline or an environment like that. So I don't know. I think it's awesome. But you might by nature be a more disciplined human, Mr. Giles.
Look, I wouldn't go that far. I like the next one that you're going to say, which is about talking to your dog.
Yeah. So one of the guys I interviewed, he says he goes for a walk and he talks his problems through and his ideas through with his dog. When he says it works. Because he's just talking them out. Obviously, the dog doesn't answer, or at least he didn't admit that the dog answered. But the point of it is, it doesn't matter what the heck you do as long as it works, and just be open to different things that get your mind into that creative thinking space where you're coming up with great stuff.
Yeah. I think like my perspective is that, and we may get a bit too deep too quick here, but my perspective is that we make decisions in our subconscious and not our conscious. Okay. So the more that we can curate an environment where the subconscious can process, then the better the decisions that we'll make. So if you are always in a highly demanding environment, putting out fires with your team or trying to solve rapid fire, you are really just reacting to the situation as it sits. When you can step out of that and let your subconscious do its magic through, the examples we've provided, exercise, walking, conferences, whatever it is, that's when you can really do some serious cognitive processing to make some great progress.
I agree. And many of these things are ways of activating that, I believe. Like for me, when I write, it shocks me when I write what comes out. It's so simple and so clear. But because it gets me into a certain state where I'm accessing and activating different things than in the day-to-day firefighting busyness. And truly, I don't want to sound egotistical, I feel like I'm like 3 times as smart when I'm writing and I get into that state. Yeah. What it really means is I'm 1/3 as smart normally.
Well, that's the flow state.
It absolutely is. So the final thing is like, okay, that's all wonderful. Now, how do you get the value from it? So whatever you're doing, and I've seen, lots of CEOs or leaders have little notepads they'll write key things down in, or on their phone, or some have memories where they just remember that stuff. But somehow it needs the highest value stuff needs to be actioned. And, to quote Jim Collins, he said, your first question should always be a who question. When it's time to activate it, who is the who that will help you to get it done? And whether it's evolving the idea or just full on testing or implementing the idea.
Yeah. The reason that you need to do it is to get value from it. And so what is the way that you will get value from it? You've got to be conscious about that decision as well. Figure out what works. But once you figure out what works, like rinse and repeat. Keep putting it into your calendar. And there may be different time frames. For example, every day you might have 30 minutes. Every week you might have an hour or two. every quarter you might have a day, and every year you might have a week or a multiple days. There's something that'll work for you. But overall, I guess the point is that success comes from thinking. Was that the quote that your CEO gave you, Kev?
It was, think time equals a strategic leader.
Yeah, I was nowhere near.
Yeah. So it was very close.
Yeah.
Just think about that. You and I should actually book our annual think time. We get the regular tactical stuff. We talked about getting together and doing that. That's a sidebar.
Yeah, that's probably something good to talk about off air.
Yeah, exactly. We will. We can get into it right now and just share it with the listeners. So the point of it is, if we go back and review our points, I'll do the first couple here. The main point is, if you need think time to truly be strategic and the most effective version of yourself as a CEO or a leader, or even as a parent, or whatever it happens, a partner. So the idea is you got to find a way to create the time. So pick the topic, make the time, and then protect it fiercely, and then know what you need out of it. And is it contemplating a learning or brainstorming? And then Brad, you want to cover off the other ones?
Yeah. So once you've set the environment, you want to understand what's going to work for you. For a lot of people, it's exercise. It could be meeting your mentor. It could be conferences. Some people who are at a different level might like long flights. Maybe you could do better than that. And then make sure that you're getting value from it. Make sure that it's working. But overall, the point is, if you want to be a strategic leader, you've got to have think time. You've got to know that the importance of think time and how much value that brings to you. So with that, good chat today. And thanks for listening. As Kevin said earlier, if you've enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and hit that like button or review button if you can. This has been the Growth Whisperers. I'm Brad Giles in Perth, Australia. Kevin Lawrence is in Vancouver, Canada. You can find myself at evolutionpartners.com.au and my newsletter, and you can find Kevin and his newsletter at lawrenceandco.com. Hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Look forward to chatting to you again next week.
Have a great one.